Hello, my name is Hannah Brunson Miles, and I'm a student at the University of South Carolina. This is my final research design portfolio for the class EDRM 801. I have been in section J50 this past fall semester. So I've selected to use my proposed quantitative methods research design as the focus for this final project. Um, so I'm using quantitative research methods and data collection to better understand how MION can increase students' reading engagement and their motivation. The problem of practice that drove me to think about this research study was my students' lack of skills to read independently. They're required to participate in a independent reading block every day, and a lot of my students lack either the engagement or just the reading skills to be able to do so. But independent reading is an important skill that my students need to master, so I needed to provide them a way to do this. The purpose of this study will be to implement and evaluate the impact the ebook library MION has on student reading engagement and motivation. I had a review of literature section in this project. And so here I've just pulled some kind of big things I focused on. I focused on research studies that looked at independent reading and just showing how important that is for readers to be successful. I also looked at reading engagement, and here Guthrie cites that engaged readers spend about 500% more time reading than disengaged students. So it is important for students to be engaged while they're reading. I also looked at how reading ebooks does increase reading engagement and students' opinion of reading, and therefore it could increase students' reading comprehension. And also just the importance of ebook libraries and how they offer, hundreds or thousands of titles on different levels and throughout different genres, and how they and how it allows students to have access to all those books through these ebook libraries. I noticed one of the deficiencies in other research studies were that there was mostly a focus on reading comprehension and not a big focus on engagement and motivation, as far as the impact that ebook libraries have on students, and also that most of the studies focused on elementary or middle school children and not on primary or young children. Most of the studies were short term, and none of them that I could find focused really on the longitudinal effects of ebook libraries or had a research study that went on for an extended period of time. The central research question that drove the study was I wanted to know what effect does the ebook library MION have on first grade students' experiences with literature during the daily 20-minute independent reading block. And some of the sub questions I looked at were to what degree has the ebook library MION impacted first grade students' motivation to read? What is the difference in students' perception of reading before and after using MION? I also wanted to look at are students more eager to use the ebook library in their free time and at home after using it in class? And are students interested and engaged in the books that they're reading while they're reading on MION? My hypothesis was that if students use the ebook library during their independent reading block, that their reading engagement and motivation will increase, and that it will be higher than those who read traditional print books during this time. My independent variables are either the students who are reading the ebook library or the control group, which is reading the traditional print books. And the dependent variables for this study are students' reading engagement and motivation to read, which will be indicated by the student survey. The study would take place at Crooked River Elementary School, where I teach, and that is a part of the Camden County School District. And 21 first grade students will be the participants in the study. 11 will be in the experimental group, and 10 will be in the control group. My research design, the experimental group will read on the ebook library MION for 20 minutes a day during their independent reading block, and they'll use their individually assigned Chromebooks and headphones to do this. And my control group will read traditional print books from the classroom library or the school library for that same 20 minutes. And this study is quasi-experimental because the students were not randomly assigned. I am sorting students based on ability into subgroups and then putting those subgroups into the control group and experimental group. And this was just so that the groups are evenly leveled as far as student ability. The data sources, I'm going to use a pre and post intervention survey. That's going to have questions focusing on motivation and engagement. And I'm going to use a modified first grade friendly Likert scale to score that. And then I'm going to compare the pre and post survey data from students, and then I'm also going to compare the control group and experimental group. The procedures, I'm first going to obtain permission from the site and participants. And then I'm going to establish my control group and my experimental groups. I'll administer the pre-survey in small groups. The intervention period will then start for 18 weeks. After 18 weeks, I will administer the post-survey, again in small groups. I'll analyze the data, and then I'll publish the results. 2 ethical considerations I looked at. One was obtaining permission. Just since the participants are very young students, I wanted to make sure I have appropriate permission from parents for their students to participate in this study, and I also want to make sure I keep parents and participants informed throughout the study. And then I do have a participant with an IEP, so they have modified testing accommodations, and they will not be present for a lot of the independent reading block. So while the student will participate, I'm not going to collect data on the student just because of the inconsistencies. I developed a qualitative and quantitative proposed designs for this project, and I ended up going with quantitative mostly just because of the pros. I wanted to get numerical data, and I wanted to be able to compare experimental and control groups. The only con with this type of research data is that I'm limited to the survey questions, so students are not able to answer open-ended questions about how they feel about the program MyON, their engagement, or their motivation with reading. The qualitative study, some of the pros were that I could ask those open-ended questions and I could observe students using MyON, but there was no numerical data that I could get from this study, and I couldn't compare a control and experimental group. As far as alignment goes, it was difficult just because there were so many different pieces, and since the pieces were created over 8 weeks, I noticed that the voice and just there were some inconsistencies throughout the parts of this project. So aligning those was a very insightful process to see how I couldn't just copy and paste this final project together. I had to make sure that the voice matched and that the language matched and that there weren't any inconsistencies. I did change the purpose of the study, the research design, and the data sources. Originally, I was looking at reading comprehension, and then I switched it to focus on engagement and motivation. So I had to change parts throughout my study to make sure that the final portfolio would be consistent. And I received a lot of teacher feedback that was very helpful as far as my research design goes and my data collection methods, and just pointing out inconsistencies throughout was very helpful. And there are my references. And thank you so much for watching.